There we go. Hello, everybody. So, welcome to the first session for the SciOp Africa Research Committee, where by most people know already that we are through the year we do presentations, meetings, and getting everybody to work their grey matter. And I'm not talking about grey hair; they're your brains. And we thought it especially prudent to have a meeting discussing how to write an abstract since, and is everybody listening? The abstract for SciOp Africa Johannesburg June 2024 is due on the 5th of February. That means you've got more or less 2.5 weeks before your abstracts need to be in. And so this is a very opportune moment to listen closely to one of our experts in Africa. I don't think she needs introduction, but I'll just mention that she's the secretary for SciOp Africa, has done multiple research contributions longer than the State of the Nation address. And therefore, she's probably the most the best person to help us through this arduous journey. I've also published a few things, and I must tell you, I hate abstracts, and I always send it to Professor Geel, and she whips it up into something really beautiful. So I hope you all are going to take notes, and then after this, start writing all your abstracts, and then we'll be seeing mission very soon. So, Jennifer, thank you for agreeing to do this, and you've got the floor.
Thank you, Jacques. So for those of you who know Jacques, it's very difficult to say no. No to Jacques, you can't say no to him. So let me just quickly share. So I have been very lucky that I got some help from Angidi Mori, who's the fellow in our unit, with translating to French, because I definitely could not have done this on my own. I'm actually going to turn off the video just for better bandwidth. So the reason I'm doing this talk is because abstract writing is not that easy. Once you know the rules and the hidden rules, it actually is easy. So what I want to do is I want to show you how abstracts are written, how they get marked, how they get read, and that will help you to write winning abstracts. And just as an aside, for my very first SciOp International Conference, I submitted 3 abstracts. One of them was on my master's, which I was very proud of, and I thought it was amazing and everybody should hear about it. And every single one of them was rejected. So I went from 3 rejections to 1 acceptance to 2 acceptance. I was crazy enough to submit 8 abstracts once, and all of them were accepted. So now I've learned to scale down, but it's just to show that it does take time, and there are some easy rules to follow. So let's take it away. So first, that this talk is basically all my opinion. There's not a lot of research out there on this. There are a lot of papers written, but they're also, again, opinion pieces. And Angidi helped me to translate, and I had to occasionally add in a little bit when I hadn't put something there for him to translate. So all the errors are mine. So why this talk? And my first question is, why not publish? You do a master's, you supervise someone, you do an audit in your unit. Why not publish it? Why not let other people share and learn from what you've learned or from your mistakes? The next thing is, for those of us who have university joint appointments, there is the ethos of publish or perish. So you don't get promotion unless you publish. The next thing is lots of people think writing is scary or writing is hard. So I want this talk to show you that by following a few simple rules, it's not that hard. The next one is, I'm no good at writing. And I don't think that it's something that you're born with. I think it's something that you learn. But the most important thing is that we need African evidence. We are always looking to the literature. We often see that our patients are not represented, and we need to see the effect of drugs, the effect of infections and environment, etc., in our patients, so that we can actually judge what evidence to use in the way we treat our patients. Jacques did a fantastic paper a few years ago, which he invited me to co-author on. It was published in the Journal of Global Oncology, and it was all about how many clinical trials and collaborative research efforts are happening in Africa. And this is what he came up with. So he did a very stringent review of all the literature over a period of time, all the African journals, all the international pediatric oncology journals. And what he found was that less than 1% of publications in pediatric oncology come from Africa. I think someone just needs to mute. I can't see who it is. So Africa is...
Romola.
Okay. Dr. Romola, can you please mute? Thank you. Africa represents a fifth of the world's population. We have, I think, we're coming up for 1.5 billion people or 1.3, and yet less than 1% of the publications come from our continent. We have the patients, we have the brains, we can do it. Jacques, you're the host. Can you maybe just mute the people who are not muted?
I've been muting them the whole time, but everybody opens up their mics again. So from now on, I'm going to send the National Army to come and mute everything.
Right. So the start of your publishing career starts with an abstract. Once you've written your abstract, you hopefully get it accepted. And for a conference, you're either trying to present for a presentation or a poster. Both of those need an abstract. And hopefully, and this is what our universities want us to do, is to translate these presentations and posters into articles. So it doesn't end with whichever particular conference you're lucky to get into. So now we're sitting at the point where we've agreed to do an abstract. It's 3 weeks until, for argument's sake here, the South Africa deadline for abstract submissions, and we're all clutching our heads. We're going, why did I agree to this? Why did I say yes? Why did I promise Jennifer that I'd submit something? Why did I say to my boss I'd submit something? So let's take a step back and relax. The first thing is, let's talk about what is an abstract. So you have been doing some work over the last few years or few months, and it's very precious to you, and you've put a lot of work into it. So the abstract is just the summary of this. It's the essence of what you've been doing. The next most important thing is that sometimes it's the only thing, if you write a manuscript, that people will read. So you will do all that work for 3,500 words, for let's say 5 years of work, and people will only read the first 300 words. So let's make them count. When your article is being sent out to potential reviewers, they send out the abstract first. And they'll send it, for example, to Yasmin, and they'll say, "Dear Dr. Goga, here is an abstract. Would you like to review it?" And she'll read it and she'll say, "Yeah, you know what, this is not really my field," or "It's not really my interest," or "I can see this is badly written and I'm going to waste my time." So she'll reject it, for example. Or she'll read it and she'll say, "This is amazing, and I would love to be one of the first people to read this incredible work." So normally it's the last thing you write in your manuscript or when you're doing your presentation, but it's the first thing that readers see. So it really has to count. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the most important part. It's a sales pitch. you're selling your ideas. If you're trying to get to a conference and you're trying to get funding, and the funding only comes if you are doing, for example, an oral presentation, you have to sell your ideas to people so that you can jump through that first hoop. So the first people you have to sell your ideas to are the Conference Scientific Program Advisory Committee. And these are all generally relatively senior people who've been around the block a few times, who in their very, very busy lives have agreed to score abstracts. Once you get through that, you're now selling to the conference delegates, because let's say there are 4 streams in the conference, and people have to decide at 11 o'clock, am I going to Angidi's talk, or am I going to Nadia's talk? Am I going to Lisa's talk? And the way they'll decide that is by reading the abstract. Once you've done your presentation and you decide to submit to a journal, it's the journal editors who you have to sell your ideas to. And then once you've been published, it's the readers. And we all know how busy we are, and we all know that we have every good intention to read a couple of articles every night and keep up to date. But the truth is, life runs away with us, and we're busy, and we don't have time. So we'll read the abstract and we'll decide, shall I read the rest of the paper or not? So what I would like to encourage you to do is to respect your audience, and that's how you'll win them over. So it's all about planning. If you're going to a conference, you need to think very clearly, what ideas do you have that are sellable to the scoring reviewers and to the audience? And what kind of presentation is this conference most likely to attract? The next thing you must think about is, how can you make yours shine? How can you make it stand out? So I encourage you to check the themes, because if your abstract fits into the themes of the conference, you're more likely to get it accepted. If you are lucky to be working in one of the topical areas, then it's much easier, because you already have at your fingertips some data that you've been working on that everyone is interested in. So if you are sitting there with this fantastic data, you've got to think, how can you make your presentation different from other people that are doing exactly the same thing? And if you can't make it different, how can you at least make it appealing? So I'll take you through the steps of how to make it as appealing as possible. So this is how the abstracts come to the scorers. We sign up to be on a scientific program advisory committee, and then at a certain period, just when we've all forgotten what we've agreed to do, we get an email saying, you have 150 abstracts to score, and this is what we see. So there's the title. We get to see the authors generally. So some conferences have it blinded and some don't. And then it goes in the order: the introduction, the methods, the results, and the conclusion. So I just want to take you through the very first details of that. So the first thing is the title. So you've got to think about the title as the abstract of the abstract. So it's distilling the essence out of the essence. And that's one of the most important things to think about. And there's a lot of sort of differing opinion on how to do this. Should you make it clever? Should there be a pun in the title? Should there be a question in the title? And surprisingly, people have done research on this, and titles that have got questions in them are less likely to be read, and titles that have puns and abbreviations, new abbreviations, like, for example, John, can you press your magic mute button?
Yep. I'm trying as soon as it comes up.
Thank you.
I've been doing it since you started talking, so
I have no doubt that you're working hard. Thank you. So things that have, like, what people think are very clever abbreviations, like, let's say, shine or smart or angel or whatever. they're often not as smart and clever as people think they are, and they are not more likely to be accepted than plain titles. So when you do your title, my advice is to be concise and to be bold, and to actually put in the title what your main findings are. So this first topic, socioeconomic factors, is one that one of my registrars submitted to the last SciAP Africa conference. And her first title was Socioeconomic Factors in Children with Neuroblastoma, a retrospective study from 3 centers. So that tells you the main theme, but it's a bit boring. And, you know, it doesn't really grab your eye. So this conference asked for the titles to be in capitals. So that's my first little tip, is follow the rules. If they say capitals, give it to them in capitals. Don't give them a reason to get cross with you. So we decided that the essence of this abstract was that socioeconomic factors and distance from treating center do not predict survival in South African children with neuroblastoma. So it tells you a lot more. It gives you the context of where the place is, and it gives you the main finding. And you think, oh, that sounds interesting, because I would have thought that socioeconomic factors do make a difference if you didn't know about how dreadful neuroblastoma was. So here's another one. Socioeconomic factors in children with retinoblastoma, a retrospective study from 3 centers. So here, the first option was a multi-center study evaluating the presentation, predictors of survival, and outcomes of retinoblastoma in Rwanda. So you could cut off that whole first line: presentation, predictors of survival, and outcomes of retino in Rwanda. So again, you think, that's interesting. Retino is one of the 6 GICC focus cancers. Rwanda, I haven't heard about much coming out of there. I'd really like to see what they found. Right, so the next part is the authors. And I just want to give you a little bit of the sort of politics behind authorship. Generally in our field, in medicine, the first author is the person who did most of the work. So for example, it may be their master's project, it may be an audit that they did, it may be something from their PhD, it may be something they thought was very important. They came up with the idea, they did the protocol with some help from, for example, a supervisor or some colleagues, and they put together the abstract. So they did all the heavy lifting. So the order it normally goes in our field is the first author is the most important. The senior author, which is the last author, is also very important. And then there's everybody in the middle. So some people decide to put everybody in the middle in a particular order, like let's say I like Geel, so I put her after my name. And then I think Hafsat was very kind to me, so I'll put them next. And then Headley really did a lot of work, so I'll put them next. And then I kind of run out of steam. So that's obviously a very random way of doing it. Other groups do it alphabetically. So the first and last author are not alphabetical, but everybody else in the middle goes alphabetically. And that's particularly useful if you've got something like 450 authors. I think some people here are on a couple of papers that I've been on that have literally got 450 authors. And there's no way you can decide who did more work, so who should be more important. So we were all just shoved in alphabetically, and that's absolutely fine. And then other people try and pay a lot of attention to who did the most work. But again, that can be quite contentious. So I would say pick your style and stick with it. But in terms of career progression, what counts on your CV is being a first author or a last author. So you should only include research. So for example, you wouldn't You wouldn't include the person who funded the lab if they didn't make an intellectual contribution. You wouldn't include your boss just because they're your boss if they haven't made any contribution. And the other important thing is that whatever goes in a paper has to be publicly defended if necessary. So we all know about some of the COVID papers that have been retracted. We know about the big autism paper that was retracted. If your name is on one of those papers, you are saying that you agree with the findings. So you really need to engage with the material to make sure that it represents what you think the science shows. So there are criteria. There's a group called the International Committee of Medical Journal Editors, and they've got 4 criteria. So the first one is substantial contribution to the conception or design of the work, or to do with the data. So acquisition, analysis, or interpretation. So you can see there's lots of ways that people can fit in. So maybe the stats person didn't collect the data, but they analyzed it. Or maybe so you can include those people. But they must also be involved in drafting the work or reviewing it critically for important intellectual content, as well as final approval of the version to be published. So that's why when we co-author papers, we always send it out one last time to say, guys, this is the version that's going into the journal. And then the last thing is that you must agree to be accountable for all aspects of the work. So it's quite a responsibility. It's not something where someone says, won't you co-author with me? And then you give it a quick squiz and you sign your name to it and you're done, because then you have not done your duty. Right, now we'll go to the body of the abstract. So the very first sentence is an overview of the problem. So let's say retinoblastoma has 100% survival, but we know that low and middle income countries, the survival is only, let's say, 30%. So that immediately contextualizes what you're doing. Then the next sentence, you outline the gap in the knowledge. So you'll say something like, we don't have good data on retinoblastoma in East Africa. And then your last sentence says your objective. So in this study, we aim to determine the survival rates of children with retinoblastoma in East Africa. So that's it. That's all your introduction needs to be. 3 sentences, short and sweet. Then you go to your methods. Now the methods will be a little bit different depending on what kind of study you've done, but you want to give the basics. So you say whether it's prospective or retrospective. You talk about what kind of study it was. You talk about the setting. So was it facility-based? Was it national multi-center? Was it many countries multi-center? Was it in under-resourced areas, etc.? You give the basic inclusion criteria. So you don't want to put everything because then you'll have no words left to finish. You put the basic demographics and then the date of the study, because you want to know, was this thing done 15 years ago and you've only been able to write it up now, or was the last data point in December 23? And then very briefly, statistical methods. So some people would even say you don't have to put the statistical methods in. I prefer to do it because I find it easier when I'm scoring abstracts to have an idea of whether they've used the right stats to come up with their conclusions. In the results, again, it will depend very much on what you found, but you must put as a bare minimum the number of participants. So I will take more notice of a study that's got 7,000 patients than one that's got 7 patients. You give a very brief overview of the characteristics of the study group and then your main findings. So we found that of 700 patients with retinoblastoma in these countries, the survival rate was actually 50%, and most children with unilateral disease had enucleations, and those with bilateral disease, the majority lost one eye, for example. And you can put in a couple of p-values, but I wouldn't go overboard. I wouldn't put in all the confidence intervals and all the odds ratios and everything, because sometimes, again, that can be quite hard to read. You know, if there are too many brackets and semicolons and italics and, you know, jarring bits of punctuation, it can be a little bit difficult for the reader. So you just have to be very judicious about how you decide to put stuff in there. And then the conclusion must summarize the main findings, but in different words. So you don't want to say exactly what you said in the introduction. You don't want to copy and paste from your results. You want to interpret it a little bit. So let's take this fake abstract that we're writing. We found that the survival rate was higher than expected at 50%. The rate of globe loss was lower than reported, and we find these results to be generalizable or encouraging, or, you know, to not fit in with the literature, some sort of basic interpretation. But there's only so much you can say in a couple of sentences, so don't go crazy with it. So there are a couple of common mistakes that people make, which can annoy the reviewers and which can confuse the reader. So the first one that I find quite commonly is mixing up your methods and your results. What I would advise is to read your abstract very, very carefully and ask yourself with each sentence, is this methods or is this results? And then split them up and put them in the right place. Then filler words. Nevertheless, heretofore, surprisingly, undoubtedly, all of those sorts of things, they're basically their judgment. They're not academic, they're not science, and they take away from your word count. So 300 words when you're sitting with an empty page might seem quite intimidating, but when you're trying to condense all your incredible work into one page, 300 words is not a lot at all. So if your abstract is too long, go through it, cut out every single filler word, cut out all the adjectives if you possibly can, and then try and condense each sentence down to its essence. The next common mistake is breaking all the rules. And, you know, as medical professionals, generally, we are, you know, we're leaders. We're leaders of the oncology team. Often we can be rule breakers. But when it comes to an abstract, follow the rules so that you can win the game. And then the other common mistake is to write your abstract at the last moment. So I would say write it and then let it mellow. Write it, put it down, look at it again the next day, and you'll immediately find mistakes that you've made that weren't obvious the day before. Give it to your co-authors and let them have some time to let it mellow. So sorry, don't, for example, if the abstract deadline, for example, for Cyber Africa is on the 5th of February, send the abstract to people on the morning of the 5th of February and ask for their input, because nobody's got time for that. Nobody, you know, that they're probably co-authoring on other abstracts. So if 3 people do that to them, somebody's abstract is going to suffer. So rather do it at least a week or 2 beforehand, especially if there may be some data that someone takes issue with that you then have to go back and look at. You don't want to be doing that at midnight on the 4th of February, stressing out, you know, your heart pounding and your face feeling hot because you can just feel the shame of submitting something terrible. Give yourself some time, write it. Just write down anything. If you're feeling stuck, write down rubbish and then let it mellow. And then come back to it after a day or two, and then you can see where you're going wrong or where it's actually shining. What leads to automatic rejection? So the first thing, if it's an international conference, they are not going to accept a case report because it's one patient. It's just, it doesn't show anything. There's no statistical relevance. It may be interesting for you or for your team, but no one's going to come and listen to one person talk about one patient. Single center retrospective reviews, also at larger conferences, the scoring reviewers are often advised to reject those. So you're not even going to get past the first, you're not going to get past the starting block. If you put figures and tables into your abstract, it's generally against the rules. It's going to annoy the reviewer and they're going to reject it. If the word limit is 300 words, then stick to 300 words because that's what they've asked for. And if you don't play their game, they're not going to let you onto their field. And some of the abstract, the software actually cuts you off at 300 words. So you may have your last most incredible sentence in your conclusion, but the abstract submission portal, because you've exceeded the word limit. And then the last thing is, if you say, we will describe the results. My answer is because I'm not going to let you in because I can't see your results to judge whether they're any good or not. So you must have some final data to put into your abstract. So obviously you're not going to falsify data. You can only put in what you have done, but you'd be surprised how much you can do in a couple of weeks when the pressure is on, how much data you can crunch and how much analysis you can do. So don't be discouraged because you feel like you're running out of time. Just go for it. So SIOP, so in pediatric oncology, this is our main, biggest organization. So this is the way we score. And you may think on first look that it's subjective, it's objective because it's numerical. But if I look at an abstract and I go, is this amazing or is it really terrible? It's still very subjective. So if we think it's horrendous or doesn't, someone's broken all the rules and has gone off piste doing their own thing, then we reject it. If it's just above rejection status, it goes into publication only. So those will go onto an online publication system. Then we say it's poster presentation, low, intermediate, or high quality. And again, like, how do you decide whether it's worthy of a poster? Can you imagine what the data will look like? Half by 70 centimeter, big piece of cardboard. Then there's oral presentation, low, intermediate, and high quality. So it's very subjective. And this is why I would really, really encourage you to be nice to the reviewer. And then if you're lucky, someone will judge it to be at prize level. So SIOP Africa, okay, so firstly for SIOP, and I'm using this as a model for many international conferences. So there's a scientific program advisory committee, and each abstract is seen by 3 to 5 people. And they're considered to be internationally recognized experts in their field with the appropriate clinical, translational, and basic research accomplishments and publications. So you're not going to come out of your fellowship and be asked to score these abstracts. You really do need to have a little bit of experience. You need to be recognized as knowing what you're doing. And for consensus or for sort of slightly more objective approach, that's why we have 3 to 5 people doing it. So you can be sure that it's not just one reviewer having a bad day. If the majority of them rejected it, then it really wasn't the right abstract for that conference. So in SIOP Africa, we do something similar, but what we particularly look at is relevance to the African situation. We also look at quality and we look at novelty. In our scoring system, we've got a minimum of 3 reviewers, and then we average the scores, and then we take the top scorers. And sometimes, there may not be enough, let's say, solid tumor abstracts. So we will accept a couple more that are scoring more in the poster category than in the in the oral presentation. And sometimes there'll be a lot that look amazing, but we have to draw the line somewhere. So it may not always seem completely fair, but it's really about how much space is available in the program. Shark, would you mind muting again?
I've muted all the ones that I can see that's
okay. It's just I'm easily distractible. So the nuances of scoring that you must know as someone who writes abstracts is that it can be more subjective than objective. All the reviewers have their own little idiosyncrasies. So I may decide that there's a particular statistical method that I think is absolutely rubbish and people shouldn't use it. And every time I see an abstract with that, I'll just mark it down because that's the bee I've got in my bonnet this year. You've got to know that reviewers are human. They're not machines. They're not robots. They have good days and bad days. They are peer reviewers. So they're basically the people that you know, the seniors in that group. So I would say make it easy for them. Make it easy for them to see how amazing your work is. Don't be wordy. Be very precise and focused, and don't annoy them. So what I mean by don't annoy the reviewers is play nice. If I'm asked to score 150 abstracts, if I spend 1 minute reading every abstract of 300 words, that's 150 minutes of my life, which is 2.5 hours, which is not that much. But if I only budget for half an hour every night at the end of my long, busy day, it begins to feel like quite a drag. If I have to spend 5 minutes on your abstract, then that's 15 hours of my life. That's almost a whole working week. And I don't know, I just feel the more time you make the reviewer spend, the more cranky they get. So don't make them have to go back and reread and try to figure out what you're saying. Make it clear. And one of the ways you can do that is read it out. So if you read it out to yourself and you find, you're talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, and you have to take a breath, and your sentence is still not finished, means your sentence is too long. Or you read it and you suddenly realize you've used the word, extreme 4 times in 300 words. Go back, use a thesaurus and find something different so that you can use different words. Make it very, very clear. Make sure that it's grammatically correct. And there's absolutely no shame in asking someone to just read it for you. And I mean, it's 300 words. It's not a lot of time for one person to just give you some help. And SciOp and SciOp Africa do both offer a volunteer service where if you ask us for help with an abstract, we're very happy to read it for you and help you with editing it. So don't be scared to ask. And in my experience, all the people that we have on the list to help love to help. They want to be needed. So give them a reason to live. Play the game. Follow the instructions. If they say submit it in English, then don't submit it in Portuguese. If they say you can submit it in French, then go for it. Don't feel that you have to submit it in English because that means that they've got a French-speaking reviewer. So use that opportunity if you want to. All the systems will have some rules written out on their websites. For example, commas, 2,250. Some may say 2 space 250, others will say 2 comma 250. If they say use a period or full stop in your p-values, don't use a comma. Don't make up your own abbreviations. So even in an abstract, if you put an abbreviation, you have to use it, you have to spell it out the first time. If it's something that we all use all the time, like for example, HIV, then you may be able to get away with not spelling it out. But some reviewers are more strict about that than others. Then always use people first language. So don't talk about a relapsed osteosarcoma, say a patient with relapsed osteosarcoma. Talk about children with leukemia, not leukemia patients. And that's just a pain if you're trying to cut down words, but it's important for the way we think about patients. Always use the generic names for medications. So for example, pembrolizumab, not Keytruda, because in a couple of years' time, there may be another generic for pembrolizumab. And then the convention generally is measurement in metric units, so kilograms, for example, not in pounds. So I put a picture of my son here, just to remind me to talk about playing the game. This is from him last year when he was 11. He played for the under 12s and the under 13s. So at the end of the season, he came out with a medal for both groups, and he was very proud of himself. But he'd thought about this at the beginning of the year. So he played the long game, and he played strategically because he was really quite keen on getting these medals. So the extrapolation for you is submit more than one abstract if you can. You're more likely to get an abstract in. Don't necessarily go crazy and submit 8 abstracts like some people. Some more tips are use all the tools that are at your disposal. Spell check's there for a reason. Grammarly is free. Beta readers are the friendly people around you who can read it for you and tell you where you're going wrong or how amazing it is. Let it mellow and read it aloud. So for me, writing abstracts is a game. Play by the rules and your odds of winning increase. If you want to break the rules, you have to be amazing. So Picasso started out with sort of a classical way of doing his art. It was fairly traditional, and he conquered it. He mastered that before he moved on to the next thing. So you can see in his blue period, things look completely different. Then Cubism, also completely different, but he built on his solid foundation. He didn't go straight from drawing stick figures to Cubism. So if you want to break all the rules, make sure you're a Picasso and you've got something really incredible to say. How are manuscript abstracts different? Well, I would say they're almost identical. The important thing is to check the journal's requirements and follow them to the letter. And if you submit, let's say you submit to pediatric blood and cancer and they reject it, and then you want to submit to the Lancet Oncology, go and read the Lancet Oncology and see what's different. So maybe you picked an American journal first and they want American spelling. Now you're going to a UK journal and they want UK English. Change it to UK English. Even if someone is going to edit it, make sure that you have done absolutely everything you can so that nothing jars on the reader. So even with groundbreaking research, unless the paper is correctly written, at best, your publication will be delayed, and at worst, it'll be never published. And I think we all know that feeling of, this is so much work, I actually don't think I can carry on. So you want to be on the smiley side of the Wong Baker faces. You don't want your article never to be published. You want all that work that you've done over the last few years to see the light of day so that other people can benefit from it. Okay, so that didn't come out. Oh, there we go, sorry. So looking at author behavior versus reader behavior, authors want to publish more, but readers want to read less. So make sure that what you write is something that they want to read. You're not always going to know what people want to read, but if you do something that's been done before that doesn't really add much, they're not really going to want to read it. So a little bit of insider knowledge on journal reviewers. they only get one journal article at a time, so they will spend more time than Congress reviewers. Your article reviews don't necessarily get scored, but each journal does have its own subjective way of asking you, is this a good article or not? To remember again that peer review is the best we've got, but it is still subjective. And editors and reviewers love novelty. So something I learned recently is that magpies actually don't steal shiny things, but that's the way I think of editors. They love the new shiny thing and they want to take that to their own nest. So if you've got something new or you can show a new angle, then play that up, really emphasize that part. So an article follows quite a rigid structure that hasn't changed that much over the last few years. Some people will read the title, some will read the title and abstract, and very few will go on to read the whole article. So put your most important stuff in your abstract. Put all your good findings. So that's it from me. I think you can do it. It's not as difficult as you think. You've got nothing to lose by submitting. As one of my supervisors said to me, rejection is free. Just go for it. So use your team, submit to the conference, get the medal, and then go immediately on to the next one. Start planning the next one. So I want to thank especially Jacques, who is putting on all these webinars. He's doing a fantastic job. And then Angidi, who is the person who helped translate this to French. So I've left, hopefully, enough minutes for some discussion. Jacques, I'll put it back to you to moderate.
Cool. So thanks a lot, Jennifer. It's funny how working with you, I can see how you have drilled that into me as well. So thank you for that. And I must say, people, that sometimes when you sit with too many words, if you go by these rules, I'm telling you, then you Jennifer gives it back to you, and you get extra words that you can add. So I'm going to open the floor for questions. Is there anybody that would like to ask a question?
I just want to say how nice it is to see so many familiar faces.
It is amazing, isn't it? Luckily, because I've had to mute everybody, I could read every single one of them. I don't see any hands at the moment. There's just a lot of praise from you also. Wait, there's a hand. Wait. So there's a lot of praise for you. Aisha, please ask your question.
Hi, thank you so much for a lovely talk. My question is, you mentioned about making the title. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, sorry, I thought there was. You mentioned about making the title better. So my question is, you don't have to use the title as you sent it to ethics.
Definitely not. So
okay.
when you do a proposal for a postgraduate degree, you must have a title that you then submit with your finished thesis. But let's say you decide from your master's that you want to publish an article, and as you publishing it, as you're writing it up, you get lots more insights and you get a bit of advice, and you actually decide your first title was rubbish. You can submit a completely different title. You can submit a published article with a different title to how it was when you submitted it to the protocol committee and the ethics committee. But if you're not submitting a published article, you're just submitting a thesis, it should have the same title.
Thank you. Thanks.
Pleasure.
I want to second that, because if you look at when you do a thesis versus an abstract for a congress versus for an article as such, your focus is always in a different place. So yeah, and I mean, as Jennifer said, that what you really want to push home is where you would, for a Congress abstract, really score the points. I'm going to have a look. Ndeka, you've got a question.
Hi, Prof. Thank you so much for a wonderful talk. It's very insightful. Can I ask if one is already presented the data at a previous conference, are we allowed to submit for this one, or we're not allowed to submit a talk that's previously been done or a presentation that's previously been done from previous conferences or talks? Thanks.
Yeah, so it depends from one conference to the next. So for this one, for SciUp Africa, we are very happy to accept talks that have been given at other conferences. The bigger ones, where it's much more competitive, they generally have a rule that it mustn't be somewhere else. So it can be published, but it shouldn't be presented. And I mean, I think it's because they want to keep the novelty going. So it's really about the conference. You just got to read the rules. So for our one, we'll accept it happily.
Okay, thank you.
Tandeka, just as a sideline, just remember, if we look at the ethics of all these things, if you have submitted this abstract somewhere and it was published in some form or another, remember, you are not allowed to self-plagiarize. So make sure that your abstracts are not verbatim the same. Otherwise, you're self-plagiarizing, and then you could get into trouble. So go tinker with it, and I'm sure the second time you'll come out with a much better abstract than the first time, because it has marinated for very long, as Prof. Geel said. So
Okay,